One of the most powerful moments in a woman's life is not when someone chooses her, but when someone loses her, because that is when the truth finally comes out. When a man takes you for granted, when he stops seeing your worth, when he believes you will stay, regardless of how little he gives, he unknowingly sets the stage for his own regret. But that regret doesn't come from revenge, manipulation, or playing games. It comes from something far more powerful, your transformation. Not the kind that screams for attention, but the kind that rises quietly, steadily, unshakably. The kind grounded in self-respect, emotional discipline, and inner power. And that is what this journey is really about. When someone loses you, it does something fascinating to the human psyche. Behavioral psychology tells us that people only feel the weight of something once its presence is gone. When you are always available, always forgiving, always adjusting, people become desensitized. They think your kindness is a personality trait rather than a choice. They start to believe your patience is endless, your forgiveness is automatic, your love is guaranteed. And that illusion is exactly why people get comfortable. Not because they are cruel, but because they are human. Humans adapt. Humans normalize. Humans assume. Until reality proves them wrong. A man takes you for granted because he thinks he knows you. He believes he can predict you. He expects you to keep showing up even when he stops showing up for you. He assumes you will hold the emotional weight, carry the relationship, and keep the connection alive while he puts in minimal effort. He assumes your love is stronger than your self-respect. And the moment he starts assuming, he stops appreciating. That is the psychological shift that leads to neglect, disrespect, inconsistency, and distance. You start feeling like you are fighting for someone who has stopped fighting for you. You feel invisible in a place where you once felt valued. You feel like you are trying to save something he isn't afraid to lose. And that is one of the most painful realizations a woman can have. But this pain is also an awakening. It forces you to look at yourself differently. It forces you to ask the questions you were avoiding. Why did you tolerate behaviors that hurt you? Why did you keep giving chances that were not deserved? Why did you place someone's approval above your inner peace? Why did you hope that love would change a person who wasn't changing themselves? These questions are not about blaming you. They are about freeing you, because once you understand why you allowed certain patterns, you gain the power to break them. And that is the moment the shift begins. Regret is not triggered by punishment. Regret is triggered by contrast. When the version of you he once took for granted becomes a version he can no longer reach, that contrast becomes undeniable. The woman who needed reassurance becomes the woman who provides her own. The woman who accepted excuses becomes the woman who accepts only effort. The woman who overextended becomes the woman who conserves her energy. The woman who feared letting go becomes the woman who walks away with dignity. That contrast is what shakes a man awake. But you do not create it for him. You create it for you. His realization becomes a side effect, not the mission. To understand how a man regrets losing you, you first need to understand what men regret. They don't regret the nights you cried. They don't regret the explanations they didn't give. They don't regret the excuses they made or the emotional labor they put on your shoulders. They don't regret the moments when they dismissed your feelings. Those things only hit them later. What men regret most is seeing a woman become everything they never valued when they had the chance. Regret happens when he sees you thriving in the areas he failed to support, when he sees you growing in ways he never inspired, when he sees you glowing in peace he never helped protect, when he sees you loved by the world in ways he never recognized, when he realizes you are happier without him than you ever were with him. That is what triggers regret, not your anger, not your sadness, not your absence. Your evolution. But before you reach that point, you must walk through the emotional landscape that comes after being taken for granted. And that landscape is not easy. It is full of doubt, hope, fear, and confusion. You replay conversations, trying to figure out what went wrong. You blame yourself for not being enough, not being perfect, not being lovable. You try to rationalize his behavior, defend his patterns, excuse his lack of effort. That is not weakness, that is psychology. The human brain naturally clings to familiarity, even when familiarity is unhealthy. It prefers the known struggle over the unknown peace. But every woman reaches a moment when the pain of staying becomes heavier than the fear of leaving. That moment is your turning point. You don't lose yourself all at once. You lose yourself quietly, one compromise at a time. You dim your light a little so he can shine. You silence your needs a little so he doesn't get overwhelmed. You shrink yourself a little so the relationship doesn't fall apart. You train your heart to tolerate emotional starvation as if it is normal. But it is not normal. It is not love. It is the slow erosion of the self. And when you finally step back and look at what you've become, there is a part of you that knows this is not who you were meant to be. This is not who you are. And that realization hurts, but it also liberates, because the moment you recognize how far you've drifted from yourself is the moment you decide to come back home. You reclaim your voice, you reclaim your strength, you reclaim your self-worth, you reclaim your identity. You decide to become the woman you promised yourself you would be long before he ever entered your life. And as you begin this process, something powerful happens inside you. The attachment begins to dissolve. The illusion breaks. Your perspective shifts. You no longer crave reassurance from someone who destabilized you. You no longer want affection from someone who withheld it. You no longer seek validation from someone who failed to value you. That emotional detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. When clarity arrives, you stop holding on to potential and start acknowledging reality. You see the patterns for what they are, not for what you hope they could be. You see his actions with objectivity instead of emotional bias. You see the relationship without the lens of fantasy. That clarity is what allows you to disconnect with grace instead of anger. You begin to withdraw your energy. You stop chasing conversations that go nowhere. You stop initiating effort that isn't reciprocated. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never deserved access to it. This quiet withdrawal is the beginning of your transformation. People rarely notice when you start loving them less. They notice when you stop loving them at all. And this silent shift within you begins to show in ways he never expected. You become calmer, less reactive, less emotionally available, less concerned with his opinions, less influenced by his inconsistency. This emotional shift is what confuses a man the most. He was accustomed to the version of you who tolerated, forgave, adjusted, but now he meets a version who observes, evaluates, and chooses differently. That is when the discomfort begins. That is when the ego begins to panic. That is when he feels the first hint of loss. You don't have to make him regret losing you. You only need to become the woman he was too distracted to appreciate. The woman who no longer bends, the woman who no longer over-explains, the woman who no longer negotiates her worth, the woman who carries herself with quiet strength and undeniable confidence. Regret is born not from your revenge, but from your rebirth. And this rebirth begins with a psychological shift inside you. You stop measuring your value through someone else's behavior. You stop believing that love requires suffering. You stop thinking that your loyalty should be unconditional. You stop giving chances to someone who has not earned them. You stop living in the emotional waiting room where he left you. Instead, you begin building a foundation of inner strength so solid that no man's inconsistency can shake it again. This is where your story truly begins. Not in the heartbreak, not in the disappointment, not in the pain. Your story begins in the moment you decide that losing you must come with consequences. Not through anger, but through evolution, through discipline, through intentional self-respect, through choosing yourself so completely that no man ever feels like your emotional center again. When you rise like this, a man feels your absence long before he sees your presence somewhere else. He feels the void where your energy used to be. He feels the distance where your warmth once lived. He feels the silence where your effort once filled the space. And this is exactly how regret begins. Slowly, quietly, unavoidably. Your transformation is not about proving anything to him. It is about proving everything to yourself. You learn that your worth is not negotiable. Your value is not up for debate. Your love is not a reward for poor behavior. And your presence in someone's life is not guaranteed. It has to be earned. When you embody this truth, you stop waiting for him to realize what he lost, because you realize what you gained, yourself. There comes a moment in every woman's healing journey when she looks in the mirror and recognizes the version of herself she abandoned along the way. Not the broken version, not the disappointed version, not the one begging for bare minimum affection, but the woman she was before she let someone else's behavior dictate her sense of worth. That moment is not loud. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand declarations. It arrives quietly, like a whisper inside the soul, saying, "Come back home." And coming back home means rebuilding your identity. Not around him, not around heartbreak, not around longing, but around your own power. Rebuilding yourself after being taken for granted is not about pretending nothing happened. It is about understanding exactly what happened and using that understanding to transform yourself from the inside out. Psychology teaches us that identity is shaped by the patterns we tolerate, the boundaries we set, and the standards we enforce. When you loved someone who didn't value you, you unconsciously lowered your standards to accommodate their lack of effort. You stretched yourself emotionally to fill the gaps they created. You reduced your expectations because you didn't want to lose them. You molded your heart around a version of love that required you to suffer first and be appreciated later. That distortion becomes a habit, and habits become identity. So the first step in rebuilding is correcting the internal narrative that says you must earn what should be naturally given. You don't earn respect, you expect it. You don't chase love, you attract it through self-worth. You don't beg for emotional availability, you choose relationships where presence is natural, not negotiated. This psychological shift is foundational. Before the world sees your transformation, you must see it within yourself. You must rewrite the story you tell yourself about why things fell apart. It wasn't that you weren't enough. It wasn't that someone else was better. It wasn't that you failed. It was simply that you were giving high-value love to someone functioning on low-value capacity. And no matter how much you gave, he didn't have the emotional maturity to meet you at the level you were offering. When you internalize this truth, your heart stops blaming itself. Your mind stops replaying every conversation looking for signs you missed. Your energy stops attaching to what could have been. Instead, you begin focusing on what will be. You begin seeing yourself not through the lens of rejection, but through the lens of reclamation. And this shift is powerful because it changes the way you carry yourself. A woman who knows herself is a woman no one can diminish. A woman who rebuilds herself from the inside is a woman people cannot replace. This is where your transformation truly begins. As you heal, something interesting happens. You stop craving emotional intensity and start craving emotional stability. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop confusing chaos with chemistry. You stop equating being needed with being valued. This shift often feels uncomfortable because it forces you to confront the truth. You accepted behaviors you would have never tolerated if you had been fully connected to your worth. You allowed certain patterns because you believed that love required sacrifice. But sacrifice without reciprocation is self-destruction. And once you understand this, you learn to choose differently. You begin to rebuild your boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as standards that determine who gets to stay. You no longer allow access to people who drain your energy. You no longer entertain conversations that go in circles. You no longer respond instantly to someone who took days to respond to you. You no longer accept crumbs from someone you gave a full heart to. These boundaries do not come from bitterness. They come from clarity. They come from discipline. They come from maturity. And they send a powerful message. I will never again shrink myself to fit into a space where I am not valued. As you do this inner work, you begin to notice changes in the way you move through the world. Your energy becomes quieter but more powerful. You become more deliberate with your time. You become more selective with your attention. You become more grounded in your emotions. You no longer react out of insecurity. You respond out of self-respect. This shift is magnetic. People can feel it even before you speak. You walk differently, you speak differently, you make decisions differently. You no longer tolerate things that disturb your peace. You no longer chase things that are not aligned with your worth. You no longer lose yourself in someone else's world. Instead, you build your own. One of the most transformative parts of rebuilding your identity is reclaiming your emotional independence. Emotional independence doesn't mean you don't need anyone. It means you don't depend on anyone to regulate your sense of value. You no longer allow another person's presence to determine your happiness or their absence to determine your sadness. You learn to soothe your own emotions. You learn to validate your own feelings. You learn to comfort yourself without running back to the person who hurt you. This is emotional discipline. And emotional discipline is one of the most attractive qualities a woman can possess, not because it intimidates others, but because it protects you. When you reach this level of emotional strength, the world begins to respond differently to you. People notice your calm confidence. They sense your boundaries, your standards, your self-respect. They recognize that you are no longer the woman who overextends, over-explains, or over-invests. You've become the woman who shows up with intention, not desperation. The woman who chooses herself first without guilt. The woman who knows what she wants and what she will never again tolerate. That energy is powerful, it is rare, and it is unforgettable. Number 5, and while you are rebuilding, something begins happening on the other side of the story, the side involving him. The moment you detach, he starts to feel what he never felt when he had you, the weight of your absence. At first, it's subtle. He notices you're quieter, less available, less reactive, less affected. He can sense the shift even if he can't articulate it. He sees that the emotional supply he once depended on is gone. The attention he once expected is no longer guaranteed. The predictable version of you he relied on is no longer predictable. This unnerves him, because men may not always understand emotions, but they understand patterns. And when their patterns stop working, they feel destabilized. This is when he begins to question, why isn't she reaching out? Why isn't she asking for answers anymore? Why doesn't she seem hurt? Why is she so calm? Why doesn't she care the way she used to? Why does she look more grounded, more confident, more self-assured without me? This is where regret begins, not because you punished him, but because your behavior contradicts the version of you he built in his mind. He expected you to fall apart without him. He expected you to hold on forever. He expected you to keep waiting for him to change. But instead, you evolved. You outgrew the version of love he offered. And that is something the male psyche struggles with deeply. Men don't regret losing a woman because she was emotional. They regret losing her when she becomes emotionally unavailable to the chaos they created. They don't regret losing her when she communicates her needs. They regret losing her when she stops communicating altogether. They don't regret losing her when she tries to fix things. They regret losing her when she no longer sees anything worth fixing, because at that point he knows he cannot reach you anymore in the ways that once worked. And that realization is a blow to the ego like nothing else. But here's the truth you must hold on to. His regret is not your goal. His regret is simply a natural consequence of your growth. It is the byproduct of a woman who stopped trying to be chosen and chose herself instead. When you rebuild your identity, you are not crafting a revenge fantasy, you are aligning with the highest version of yourself. You are shedding insecurities, rewriting narratives, and elevating your life in ways he never contributed to. You are becoming the woman you were meant to be before emotional fatigue dimmed your light. And once you become her, you realize something profound. You were never afraid of losing him. You were afraid of losing yourself. And now you are back. As your identity strengthens, so does your lifestyle. You begin investing in your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. You start treating yourself as the valuable person you are. You move with intention. You take care of your body not for external validation, but because you respect yourself. You feed your mind with knowledge, inspiration, and discipline. You surround yourself with people who uplift you instead of drain you. Your environment reflects your growth. Your habits reflect your standards. Your decisions reflect your self-worth. And slowly you become the version of yourself that a man remembers for the rest of his life. Not because of how much you loved him, but because of how beautifully you rose without him. This is the phase where life begins to show you the rewards of choosing yourself. Opportunities appear. New connections form. Your energy attracts higher quality people and experiences. You regain control of your time, your emotions, your peace. You feel lighter, more confident, more aligned. Your life begins expanding in ways that would have never been possible had you stayed trapped in the emotional cycle he created. And as you rise, you begin to understand the deeper truth. Losing you was not his tragedy. It was his lesson. The next stage of your journey is becoming the version of yourself he can never reach again, never replace, and never forget. A woman rooted in self-worth becomes unforgettable, not because she proved him wrong, but because she proved herself right. And that is where we continue next. By now, you have rebuilt your identity, you have reclaimed your emotional power, you have set boundaries, cultivated self-respect, and aligned your life with your true worth. And yet, the most transformative phase is still ahead. Becoming the version of yourself that he realizes he can never replace. This is not about revenge. It is not about making him suffer or proving him wrong. It is about becoming unshakably high value, so much so that the absence of your presence resonates with a magnitude he cannot ignore. It is the culmination of discipline, feminine strength, and clarity of self. Qualities that cannot be imitated, replaced, or ignored. This stage begins with a profound understanding. The world responds to the energy you radiate. Humans are inherently attuned to presence, to power, to confidence. When a woman moves through life with emotional independence, self-respect, and calm certainty, she naturally commands attention. She no longer reacts to chaos, she controls her response. She no longer invests in instability, she invests in growth. She no longer waits for validation, she validates herself. And when a man encounters this version of you, one who is fully aligned with her worth, the realization is inevitable. He sees, in stark clarity, that he lost something irreplaceable. Becoming this woman requires consistent self-mastery. It requires the discipline to act according to your principles, not your impulses. Emotional self-regulation becomes your default mode. You do not let anger, disappointment, or longing dictate your actions. You speak when necessary, but only with intention. You engage when it aligns with your priorities, and you withdraw without hesitation when it does not. This calm assertiveness is magnetic because it signals that your world is complete without external dependency. A man can feel the shift. He may not fully understand it, but he knows it exists. And in that knowing, regret begins to crystallize. One of the most powerful tools in this transformation is time. Time allows you to fully embody the lessons learned, to refine your character, and to strengthen your emotional resilience. Time creates distance from old patterns, old dependencies, and old illusions. It allows you to focus on the life you are building rather than the person you are leaving behind. As you invest in yourself consistently, your energy evolves into a force that is irresistible, not through manipulation, but through authenticity. When he sees you flourishing in ways he failed to nurture, he cannot help but notice. That notice is the beginning of the realization that what he lost cannot be replaced by familiarity or convenience. Another critical element is purpose. Purpose anchors your life and keeps you focused on growth rather than grudges. It ensures that your actions are intentional rather than reactive. Purpose allows you to channel your energy into goals, passions, and experiences that elevate your life, creating an environment where only people and opportunities that align with your value are welcomed. When you pursue your purpose with diligence, a man notices the strength of your convictions, the depth of your engagement with life, and the peace you exude from within. And in witnessing this, he begins to comprehend the depth of his loss. It is also vital to cultivate the art of presence, being fully alive, fully engaged, and fully yourself. Presence is different from attention-seeking or dramatic displays. Presence is subtle yet profound. It is visible in your posture, your composure, your speech, and your energy. It is felt in the quiet confidence that says, without words, I am whole, I am enough, I am moving forward. Presence commands respect because it is grounded, not performative. It is the invisible signature of someone who has mastered herself and her life. And that signature leaves an imprint that lingers long after interactions end. Simultaneously, you must honor your past experiences without allowing them to define you. Every moment of neglect, every instance of being taken for granted, becomes a building block for your transformation rather than a chain that holds you back. Emotional intelligence teaches us that the most resilient individuals do not ignore pain. They integrate it, learn from it, and use it to make wiser choices. Your past becomes a compass rather than an anchor. And this integration of experience, combined with deliberate self-evolution, positions you as a woman who is not only unshakable, but unforgettable. Confidence is another pillar of this high-value transformation. Not arrogance, not entitlement, but quiet, grounded confidence rooted in self-acknowledge. You know what you bring to the table. You know your boundaries, your values, your passions. You no longer shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You no longer settle for partial effort, excuses, or inconsistent presence. This confidence does not need validation. It exists naturally, and when he witnesses this version of you, composed, self-assured, and thriving, it evokes the kind of recognition that words cannot describe, the realization that he has lost something truly exceptional. An equally important aspect of becoming irreplaceable is mastering the balance between accessibility and scarcity. Scarcity is not manipulation. It is the natural byproduct of self-prioritization. When you no longer make yourself endlessly available, when your attention, time, and energy are invested deliberately, it creates value. People respect what is earned, not what is freely given. By being selectively present, you communicate, without saying a word, that your life is abundant, complete, and worthy of respect. And in that silence, he notices. In that measured absence, he feels the magnitude of what he lost. Another subtle yet profound strategy lies in embodying joy and fulfillment independent of him. Happiness is magnetic. Joy is infectious. When you pursue experiences, friendships, and passions that light you up, when you cultivate a life that feels rich and vibrant, you radiate a vibrancy that cannot be replicated or ignored. That energy serves as a mirror reflecting all the ways he failed to contribute to your happiness. Regret is inevitable when he observes that your contentment is no longer tied to his actions or presence. Part of this transformation also involves cultivating mystery and depth. A man loses interest in what he believes he already owns. He is drawn to what he cannot fully predict or control. As you evolve, you become more complex, more multidimensional, more fascinating. Not as a strategy, but as a natural consequence of growth. Your experiences, passions, and achievements create layers that cannot be simplified or taken for granted. Imagine it within. That depth ensures that any man who once underestimated your value will now confront a version of you that is richer, fuller, and undeniably compelling. It is crucial to internalize the principle that true power comes from within, not from his acknowledgement. External validation is fleeting. The validation you seek from someone who failed to appreciate you is unreliable and ultimately disempowering. Internal power, on the other hand, is enduring. It grows as you build competence, clarity, discipline, and emotional mastery. It manifests in your ability to navigate life with purpose, confidence, and calm authority. And when a man encounters this internal power, he cannot recreate it, he cannot replace it. He can only recognize the loss he allowed. Your transformation also involves grace. Grace is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of mastery. It is the quiet strength to rise above bitterness, to maintain composure when tested, to treat yourself and others with dignity regardless of past hurts. Grace amplifies your value because it signals that you are beyond reactive drama, beyond manipulation, beyond games. It signals that your life is governed by principles, not impulses. And in witnessing your grace, he experiences the undeniable truth. He can never replicate the woman you have become. Ultimately, the woman a man regrets losing is one who embodies a combination of emotional resilience, self-respect, clarity, independence, and purposeful presence. She has rebuilt her life to be abundant, fulfilling, and aligned with her worth. She engages with the world intentionally, invests in what truly matters, and radiates confidence and calm. She does not linger on what was lost. She does not chase attention. She does not compromise her standards. She simply lives as the fullest, most authentic version of herself. And it is in this authentic, powerful existence that regret becomes inevitable, not through manipulation, but through undeniable truth. The final realization comes with absolute clarity. He cannot replace what he lost because he never nurtured it in the first place. You cannot be replicated, and your growth cannot be reversed. Every effort he makes to reclaim what he lost is confronted by the version of yourself that has already moved beyond the limitations of the past. You are no longer a source of convenience, of validation, of emotional labor. You are a source of inspiration, presence, and undeniable value. And this is the ultimate victory, not measured by revenge or reconciliation, but by the fact that you exist fully in your own power, thriving, evolving, and untouchable. So let this be your guide. Focus on becoming irreplaceable through your own growth. Invest in your identity, your emotional independence, your purpose, and your presence. Build a life that radiates abundance and fulfillment. Cultivate self-respect, grace, and clarity. Protect your energy, refine your boundaries, and rise to a level of confidence and authenticity that cannot be diminished. When you do this, regret is not something you manufacture. It is something that manifests naturally. It is the inevitable recognition of a man who once underestimated you, now confronted with a woman he cannot replicate, replace, or forget. And remember this, the journey is not about him. The journey is about you. It is about reclaiming the woman you were always meant to be, about living fully without compromise, about radiating strength without apology. It is about creating a life so rich in self-respect, purpose, and authenticity that anyone who failed to value you can only witness from the outside. That is the ultimate power. That is the ultimate transformation. That is the woman he regrets losing. And that woman, yourself, is unstoppable.